G'day fellas, welcome to the Forming Men Podcast Season 1. I'm Jon Tyson, a pastor and author in New York City, joined by my friend Jefferson Bethke, a writer and teacher over in Hawaii. And we are talking about the challenges of what it means to be a man in our cultural moment, as well as what it looks like to be formed into the image of Jesus. Thanks for joining us for Season 1. Hey fellas, before we start, I wanted to let you know how to get Jefferson and Mai's newest book, Fighting Shadows, completely free a few months before it comes out. We're building a fun launch team for the book, which means really just reading it and letting us know what you think. We'd love to have you on the team and send you a copy early. For more info and to sign up, you can go to fightingshadows.co.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Forming Men Podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 2. Last week was Episode 1. What did you think about it?
The feedback's actually been really encouraging. Yes. What we're trying to do is have a conversation with people in our culture about what it is to be a man today. It's obvious that men are struggling. We meet men all over the place who are wrestling with deep internal issues. We want to bring those issues out of the darkness and into the light so we can begin to process them and be the men God wants us to be.
Exactly. So we mentioned at the end of Episode 1 that we want to alternate kind of topical episodes with Q&A episodes. And so you guys have sent these in. And by the way, keep sending them in. I will say we prioritize ones that are a little shorter, a little bit more concise, but keep emailing your guys' questions every episode to jeff@formingmen.com. And we've picked a few for this episode that we're really excited to discuss that you guys had questions on in regards to last week. So here we go. Question 1.
Hi, Jon and Jeff. This is Clayton Mosley out of Tallahassee, Florida. How do you physically implement a redirect? If you find yourself being an Andrew Tate in a moment of life, or if you find yourself repressing in a moment of life, how would you two men describe what that redirect would look like for someone?
Hey, that's a great question, Clayton. And just to remind those, maybe if you skipped Episode 1, we kind of had the 3 R's, which was repress. A lot of men repress their masculinity because of the kind of the cultural values that are pressing them down, or release their masculinity, which is kind of like unhinged, be overly masculine, overly cranked in kind of the false archetype way. Or what we said is reorient or redirect, which is the healthy way to do it. Find the image of Jesus, reorient yourself towards him as the biblical vision of masculinity. But Clayton, that's a very good question. We can get technical because he did technically say, how do you physically reorient your masculinity? So kind of like, places and spaces, we can talk about that. But also maybe just in general, Jon, how did you hear that question and how would you say, like, what are some of the first steps of like, okay, I'm tracking with the 3 R's. I want to reorient, I want to redirect, but how?
Well, I think spaces and places is a huge one. Paul says to Timothy, flee the evil desires of youth. Yeah. So that's the first part. Like, you got to realize that some stuff is going to kill you, it is going to overtake you, and you can't be passive about it. So a redirect is not like a slow, lethargic. Yes. I think there's sometimes you got to be aggressive and you got to be instant in this. And then I think it says along with all of those. And so I think it's who you do this with. You become the total of who you spend the most time with. You take on the attitudes, the desires, the preferences of your friends. Yes. This has been proved time and time again. I think of Rene Girard, he talked about mimetic desire. What happens when you get new friends? You start caring about what they care about. You start listening to what they're listening. You start dressing like they dress. This is true. And so you've got to make sure that you're around people who are pulling you in the right direction. So part of it is fleeing. The second part is finding a crew to run with. Yes. And if you don't have one, you got to sometimes be proactive. You got to build these relationships, take initiative. Sometimes you've got to invite people in. Yeah. And I think that you've got to get a vision of what you want to do with your time. You've got to have something you're moving towards. It'll never be enough to just get away from something. Nature abhors a vacuum, Aristotle said. So when that free time is there, something's got to go in the place. So you've got to have a vision of who you want to be, where you want to be, the sort of things you want to give yourself to, whether this is putting more time in at work, like giving yourself more fully to developing your vocation, relationally, spending time with guys doing stuff that matters, pursuing women. So like consciously having a plan to spend time with them, develop a healthy relationship, spending time seeking God and with prayer. So I would say just have a core list of the things that you're about, the values you're pursuing, the friends you want, the vision for your life. And in those moments, refer back to that and then go and pursue that.
That's good. And Clayton, I would add two things to that. I would say absolutely to number one, what John said, you become the top 5 people you hang around in general. But I would say, challenge yourself, make it a fun little game. Maybe it's 4 weeks, maybe it's 8 weeks long, but say, can I put myself in, who knows, 10 or 15 different spaces and places over the next 8 weeks that I don't normally put myself in, that are around, that are reverse engineered to be exactly what John said. So whether it's where a certain type of group that you look up to of men hangs out, whether it's trying to ask to be involved or get invited. I know for me, even honestly, I've been deeply shaped by even basketball leagues at the YMCA of really good, solid brothers that are Christian and love the Lord and do a Bible study after. I remember that specifically from a season in my 20s that happened that I wouldn't have even found if I wasn't just going to the Y and playing basketball. And I was kind of asking questions and pushing in more. So make that maybe almost a challenge to yourself. Secondly, and I'll end with this, is make sure you're putting yourself in front of very good voices and ideas. This one's really important. I think especially in an internet world, we're so shaped by the voices of kind of the Mount Rushmore of men we see. There's so many dominant ones depending on who you value. But I would say maybe change that diet and see what happens. So again, we don't know your story directly, but I would say change that diet and see what happens. Meaning for me, I am maybe that's just my personality. I'm primarily inspired and I primarily stay filled with and redirect via your question when I'm reading really, really good books that are pushing me there, watching and listening really, really good talks and podcasts that are pushing me there. So it's think about what that is. And I think it's not always the big famous classics. It's genuinely people that are in love with Jesus, spiritual formation, really deeply. And I would say go older. Go to the early 1900s authors, go to some people from the church fathers. A lot of people, we read those guys, but a lot of people don't. So man, what will happen to you if you're reading someone from 500 AD talk about their desires, their masculinity, their life? It's really deeply compelling and something we don't do. And I think if you do that first challenge plus that second challenge, go in different spaces for about 8 weeks, see what happens, surround yourself with different voices for 8 weeks, see what happens. I think you'll be shocked at how much you have redirected and reoriented at the end of 8 weeks.
I think one other thought I'd put in here. You've got to be able to see through the illusion, okay? Yeah. So this is an illusion. That the Andrew Tate world that's been put out to you, it's an illusion.
Yeah.
So
it's made for social media.
Yeah, so asking yourself the question, why do I want this? Yeah. Examining your desires. What do I feel like is missing in my heart? What is drawing me to that? And then can you get that legitimate desire met in a godly way rather than in a sinful or a degrading, emasculating way? This stuff is not real. So if ask yourself the question, what is it? Do I want to be seen as strong? Do I want to be seen as successful? I think these are legitimate desires. Now, how do you reorient that towards a godly vision of what that is? So rather than just saying, this is bad, avoid, which will lead you really to just kind of short-term moral repression. Yeah. Cultivate the desire in a godly way and say, what am I going after? Here's a legitimate way to express what God's put in my heart and then pursue that as well. So doing a desire audit, figure out why you're trying to route it through this wrong source and push that towards what you think will actually satisfy that.
Amen. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for that question, Clayton. And now let's go to question number 2.
Hey, fellas. At the end of the podcast, John, you mentioned that Jesus is the one that we look to for the model of manhood, and that 90% of his life, he was just working an everyday job. But that really struck me because I think the struggle with a lot of men currently that I talk to, a lot of my friends, is that they're working a 9-to-5 job or something like it, but they don't feel fulfilled. There's something that isn't alive in them when they're working. One, is there some way that we can become self-aware and toggle that line of this is our responsibility with our job and work versus nope, you're in a rut and you need to pull yourself out of that and find something different to find fulfillment? And also, are there any tools to find fulfillment if you have to keep your job? Because Jesus worked at it in an anonymous way 90% of his life, and then those 3 years in ministry, I think that work really produced a lot in him so that he was ready for ministry. But sometimes for people, their job isn't preparation. It just is what it is. So thanks.
Keaton, that is a great question. My favorite part about your question is I think that's a genuine wrestle of a lot of men, and certainly kind of the undergirding foundation for a lot of men's frustration that they have in society today. And so I guess I have a few thoughts, and then I know you have a lot of thoughts on this because you've written on this, you've talked about this on kind of meaning and work. And I would just note a couple things. First, Keaton, I think you said something towards the end that I thought was really interesting. You recognized that Jesus's life was very disproportionately lopsided towards obscurity for a concentrated season of ministry. Preparation for ministry. Okay. But then you threw in a comment, which I totally get, by the way, of saying, you said, hey, maybe not everyone's, that if that's the paradigm, that's great, but maybe not everyone's version of work or vision of work is to prepare them for anything. It's just the work is the work. And I think I would just have a little contention with that and say that maybe I disagree, and I would push back in the sense of I think everything is preparation. Right? Everything is preparation for something. God is always using something, weaving stories together, whether you're married or not, in a family with kids or coworkers, always weaving your entire life to prepare you for the next. And to some degree, I'm not putting pressure on anyone, but to some degree, I don't think about this in my daily life, but I think we know intuitively that everything is kind of a test, depending on how you want to define that, for the next thing. Those who are given much, are forgiven much or then given much, and all these different types of things of like what we steward and multiply, the Lord will then give us more on. And so that can be that's in the mundane. That's in the mundane, in our normal work. And then the last that I'll say before you talk about your framework is, I would say one of the main things that actually, I think you said you're in your 20s, so I'm guessing you're the people that are wrestling with this too, you were framing from are in their 20s, maybe 30s, is I think we have to get back to the idea that the process is the job. Like the process is the worship. It's not about because again, I think Instagram can fool us of like, we need to be doing something deeply meaningful, deeply related to all the things that we want to do. And I think you can put yourself on that trajectory, but I think, that's going to take, decades to some degree. I think that's the wish for all of us, is to find work we find meaning in. But I would say the primary meaning, of course, we want to use our gifts. We don't want to be, non-deployed with our wirings and our callings and our gifting. That's absolutely real. That does lead to despair. But I think at the end of the day, it's deeply important for most of us to learn that the meaning is in just honoring God in the work. There's people in front of you in your work. Honor them, love them, serve them. That is a mission field. And I just think if we overcrank that, it brings meaning. The people that you are working with or utilizing your job through, plus the actual work, is the worship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Totally.
What would you add though?
Well, first thing I want to say is one of the great challenges of social media is it gives us instant access to everybody doing everything everywhere. And when you say they're just working a 9 to 5, that's what the vast majority of people on earth do. They do 9 to 5s. Yes. And do you know how many people would die to do a 9 to 5? Globally. So part of it is just orienting yourself in the reality that the majority of people will spend most of their time at work. You'll spend more time with your coworkers than you will with your spouse and your children. You will spend more time at work than you will in any other domain of your life. So this is a huge part of what you do, and getting a theology of it's good. So second thing I'd say is be patient. When you're early in your career, you can have a desire to often have the fruit that you would have in your 40s or 50s. We want quick success. And I think it's absolutely true. I'm 47. I see 27-year-olds asking me questions I never asked at that age. And I think we tend to look up at a certain output or competence that people have and say, how do I get that now? And the answer is 20 more years of faithfulness in the grind.
That's how you get it now.
So yeah. I would urge you towards just cultivating a kind of patience. Be patient and present in the process. I think that's really important. I think you've also got to avoid the idol of workism. There was a remarkable article that was written in The Atlantic on the idol of workism. We're all on an identity quest in our lives. Some people find their identity in their faith. Some people find their identity in their sexuality. A lot of people find their identity in their jobs. And so workism means that what I do has to give me eternal significance, a sense of self internal psychological strength, external validation and accomplishments. It's putting a crushing weight on our jobs that only God can give us. So I think it is important to right size our vocation, and between apathy and ungodly ambition is a healthy sense of vocation. I first heard about this from Alan Hirsch in the early 2000s in his book, The Shaping of Things to Come, where he talked about the idea of kavana, and that's the power of holy intent. We know that the attitude with which we does something can transform it. So they tell the story of a cobbler who, while stitching the bottom of a shoe to the top of the shoe, are re-stitching the glory of God into the tangible reality by the attitude with which we do it. And so the term glory, kabod, means meaning or weight. And so the way you take meaningless things and make them weighty things or significant things is by doing them with holy intent. So a school teacher who shows up to love and to educate with holy intent can take a noisy classroom and turn it into a temple, into a sacred space. Well, I used to work for 6 years as a butcher, and my goal was to take that meat factory and turn it literally into a portal for the presence of God. Everything I did, I was like, Father, this is for your glory. This is not for me. This is not just for the customer. This is for your glory. So it doesn't matter if you're delivering Pepsi, making YouTube videos, working as a manny, any job that you can think, moving furniture, any job you have, you can do it with holy intent and offer it to the Lord as a sacrifice and find profound meaning in it. Yeah, one other thing I would say about it, I was reminded of some research from the Princeton Faith and Work Initiative. And they basically said that when people think about a theology of faith and work, it basically comes down to 4 E's. And it may be worth like literally going back to your job and running your vocation, what you're currently doing through these 4 E's. First E, ethics. How am I being formed by what I'm doing? So are there any areas where my integrity is being challenged? I'm learning to treat people with dignity and respect. And so how is my character and moral formation, my ethical self being developed by how I work in the workplace personally and how I treat other people? Secondly, evangelism. How do I share my faith with the people that I work with? As we mentioned earlier, you will spend more time at work than you will at home, than you will at church, than you will in your community. So if you don't have a vision for bringing the gospel to bear on the lives of the people that you're working with, I don't think that you're going to be stewarding your time properly. How do you do that? Couple of quick thoughts. Number one, 1 Peter 3:15 says we're to be prepared, always prepared to give an answer for the hope that's within us. So I think the first thing we need to do is when people have a personal crisis, if they know we're a person of faith, Jesus is Lord and manifests in our heart, they're going to come to us and say, hey man, I'm struggling. Will you pray for me? A friend of mine needs counseling. Do you have addiction recovery support at your church? If they know that you're a person of faith, when they need help, they'll come to you. Secondly, cultural crisis. There's always going to be big issues. People will want to know, what does the church think on that? Or what do Christians think about that? So when it comes to evangelism, be prepared in the workplace to have appropriate conversations at the right time in the right place, sensitive to HR dynamics where that stuff takes place. So number one, it's an opportunity for ethical formation. Number two, it's a chance for evangelism. Number three, existential validation. This is like getting a sense of joy. Early in your career, you have the chance by what you're doing to figure out your gifts, figure out your passion, figure out your temperament, get a sense of calling, and work is one of the primary ways we do that. Ministry is what we do inside the church. This is about our spiritual gifts. This is about community. This is about service in the body. But in the workplace, it's about vocation. It's the way God's wired us to make a kingdom impact, to think about a sense of calling and fulfillment through serving the world on mission. So work is one of those places we get to live that out. And then lastly, enrichment. Enrichment is the place where we get to make a contribution to others through our jobs. My friends over at Praxis talk about 3 ways that Christians participate in the workplace. They talk about an exploitive way we show up. It's all just profits. It's all just selfishness. Then they talk about an ethical way. This is a human way of doing business. This is giving back. But then they have another level they call a redemptive way of participating. And this is asking, how do I leverage what I do to bless others? That can be by giving to the church, using your money to build up the body of Christ. That can be by giving to causes God puts on your heart. That can be by taking the skills that you learn in the workplace and using that to serve other people. That can be through your corporation as a whole, directing some of its resources in the sector or the industry. That can be about you moving your vocation in a direction that is moving it away from brokenness and towards the beauty that God has in his heart. So maybe a job would be just get a piece of paper, write down those 4 E's, and then begin to process what you're currently doing through that lens. And I think if you take the power of holy intent, you're patient with what you're working on, and then you begin to get a holistic vision, these 4 E's, and process your job through that, I think that'll give you a little bit of stuff to process through the next year or two at least, to set a foundation of how to find meaning in your daily work. So hopefully that helps in some manner.
Ooh, I don't think Keaton was ready for a treatise right there. That was basically a PhD 20-minute expose on work and faith. That was amazing. So Keaton, great question. I hope that was really deeply beneficial to you. And so that's going to be it for this Q&A episode. But for the rest of you, make sure every week we're doing a topical-based episode. We would love to hear questions based on that episode.
Love to hear
so
from
next
you.
week, we would love to answer some of your questions about next week's episode. And you can email those as voice notes to me at jeff@formingmen.com. Say your name, maybe where you're from. And I bet if you can do the question and the whole voice note under 30 seconds, there's more likelihood we will include it, because those are a little bit easier for us. We love you guys. We'll see you next week. Hey, you guys, thanks so much for watching and listening to this podcast. One fun thing that we want to do is kind of every other week or sprinkled throughout the big episodes that me and Jon are recording is we want to answer and do episodes of your guys' questions to the last episode or the last couple weeks' episodes. So the way we want to do that is we want it in your own voice. We want to hear you ask the questions. So if you want to ask a question that we will answer on the podcast, email a voice note. So record it on your iPhone and email it to us at jeff@formingmen.com. Now, 1 or 2 caveats. The shorter, the better. The more concise, the better. So maybe try to say it once or twice before you send in the recording. And also make sure to give us your name and your location, and we would love to answer them. So again, record a voice note of a question to the previous week's podcast. Send it to me at jeff@formingmen.com. We'll try to answer them.